Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison, and I want to welcome you to day 284 of Humanity Rising on this 5th day of July. Hope everyone had a good weekend. It was the 4th of July celebrations in the United States. I hope everyone had a good time celebrating the concept of freedom in a country that's been torn by unfreedom throughout the length of its history. I want to open our session today on the note of climate change. I spoke to it very briefly last week, but there was an article early last week in Arctic News, and that's a publication that just monitors the ecology, the temperatures, and the overall health of the Arctic, but also the general planetary ecology. And it was an extremely sobering account of the rising temperatures, of the melting, now irretrievable in the Arctic, in Greenland, accelerating melting in Antarctica. We are now right at 2 degrees centigrade in terms of global warming and global temperatures. There are heat domes over the middle and west of the North American continent, and most particularly over Siberia. Heat dome over the permafrost in Siberia, which is releasing massive amounts of methane. And methane, as you may know, is exponentially more contributive to CO2 than the normal emissions from fossil fuel or any other industrial release from humans. So the scientists are calling to our attention that if present trends around CO2 release, methane release, and temperature rises are not stopped dramatically, the human race can expect an extinction event by about 2026. It's 2021 right now. So over the next 3 to 4 years, if we don't turn this thing around in a very dramatic way, we're going to experience something that will so destabilize the ecology and so destabilize human society and human infrastructures as we know them, that things will essentially constitute a death knell for everything that we know to be true about our sojourn at the moment on this planet. When I read that article, and I'll put it up in the chat in a few minutes, I wrote a blog. I would encourage you to go on to the Ubiverse and check out the blog that I wrote, where the link is included, so that we couldn't be in a more critical moment where we have a couple of years now, not 10 years, not 20 years, not 50 years. We've got literally 36, 48 months to do something quite dramatic, or we're going to pay a price that will not only be unprecedented, but the consequences of which may make human habitation on this planet uninhabitable. So we need to just take that in. And so I have been, and I just wanted to raise this for all of our collective attention. And to say that nothing now is more important on this planet than human beings coming together and harmonizing themselves through connectors for peace, which is what we'll discuss today. But also then, once they've harmonized, to work together locally and globally to regenerate our ecosystem. Nearly 70% of the biodiversity of which has been wiped out in the last 50 years. So our planet could not be more fragile. Our ecosystems are breaking down, and we must act. So Ubiquity University is completely retooling itself to support regenerative action. Through our Masters in Regenerative Action, we want to create a global campaign to train what we're calling regeneration first responders. We'll be sending out information about that. We have an open house about that this Wednesday at 11:30 a.m. Pacific time, 8:30 p.m. Central European time, where faculty and our students and interested parties from all over the world are invited to consider deeply the current state of affairs and what we can do about it collectively at this moment. This is humanity rising. And what I've described over the last few minutes is the backdrop, the challenge for why, on an urgent basis, humanity needs to come together and rise. Let us begin, as we always do, with just taking a moment in the midst of the tumult and chaos and urgency and challenges, just to center ourselves, just for a minute. Feel your body, close your eyes, take a deep breath and center yourself on your heart. And for the next minute, 90 seconds, attune yourself to your heartbeat in a spirit of gratitude and deep thanksgiving that you're alive. We're all alive at this most extraordinary moment in the human journey. Thank you, everyone. Now, with an open heart and a heart full of gratitude and love for each and every one of you who are joining our session today, I want to commence our program by observing at this critical moment where the world should be coming together. We are fractured. We are caught up in polarized societies. We are fighting on policy formations, which should be completely obvious. We're inundated by fake news and the manipulations of our corporate giants. And we're running around in a maze called modernity without a sense of direction. We've been under a pandemic for nearly 18 months now. And we're devoid of institutional leadership. I can't think of a government anywhere in the world that's being well served by a leader at the level that it needs to have in order for us to address the challenges that are urgently pressing upon us. And what that means is that we, the people, need to come together and to do what our governments cannot and will not do, and our major corporations cannot and will not do unless pressed. That's the essence of democracy. So I want to introduce you to a gentleman now from Europe, from France, who has been working for decades as a strategic director of diversity and a partnership at major levels in government, in international institutions, in the World Bank, the United Nations, with major corporations like Nike and American Express and Netflix, the Red Cross, someone who's dedicated his professional life to bringing people together, and now has founded a new NGO that will be launched in September called Connectors for Peace, through which he's bringing major corporations and major international institutions together to support human harmony at this most critical moment when harmony at every level, in a spirit of respect for diversity and peace, is probably the number one priority on the human agenda. Because if we don't come together, we're not going to solve any of the problems confronting us. So I'd like to introduce you now to Jean-Christophe Bass, who will speak to us about his new organization, Connectors for Peace, and about the imperative of coming together in a more harmonized fashion at this critical moment. Jean-Christophe, welcome to Humanity Rising.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you for your very kind words of introduction. Thank you for your invitation. It's a great pleasure and a great honor to be part of this Humanity Rising community and family. And at some point, we'll be happy to discuss, how to export the model and the vision here in Europe. And because I believe this is something that should really spread around the world. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. This is really indeed a great pleasure. And I know it's a very special weekend in the US for those of you who are in the US, and there's probably no better moment than the 4th of July in a way, which is a moment of community and bringing people together, families, community, to discuss this issue of fractured society and polarization. And in a way, what I really admire with this project of the Humanity Rising is really this attempt really to bring or to create a platform for a global conversation and try to bring people from all parts of the world, from all culture, from all background together for a conversation. And having a conversation doesn't mean to agree on everything, but at least to talk, to discuss, to exchange views, and eventually to agree on how to disagree, which is already a big part of the journey, because if you agree on how to disagree, you do it in a civil way and with no violence. And in a way, what is characterizing this crisis that we have been going through in the past 14, 16 months is that for the first time in the history of humanity, all people, all individuals, all societies, wherever they are, rich, poor, east, west, north, south, whatever the culture, whatever the belief, everyone was confronted and threatened by the same danger. And it's a bit ironic to see that for the first time ever, where everyone on Earth, everyone in humanity is confronted to the same challenge and the same risk, this has not been really generating enough attempt and movement to try to bring people together. And I'm not naive. I know this is a tremendous task, but I think that what you have been doing, Jim, in launching this Humanity Rising and this daily global conversation is something that is really absolutely unique. I don't want to be too long. I think I'm more interested in hearing your views and having a real interactive discussion. And I will very briefly present my point about how to address polarization and fractured societies. But before doing so, if you allow me, I would like to I'm very bad with technology, and I don't know if we could launch I have just 3 slides that I would like to share with you.
Jean-Christophe, I can show the slides if you want. They showed up.
That would be great. Thank you. Thank you, Matt. Or Richard. Yeah, because I think images speaks louder than words, and also after this long weekend, I mean, I think images can really speak by themselves, and a good way, to trigger the conversation and to see how much personally you are confronted and how you react to this issue. So maybe we can switch to the first slide with this beautiful American flag. If we can expand this image, here we go. This athlete, probably very few of you will know him. His name is Leo Manzano. And as you can see, as you see his jersey, I mean, Leo Manzano is an American athlete and who ran for the marathon in the Olympics in 2012 at the Olympics in London. And he performed extremely well. He's, as you can see, a very young guy. And he got, I think, the silver medal. And what he did after the race is what all the athletes are typically going. He went running around the stadium to celebrate his victory and to get the applause from the people in the stadium. And of course, he took the American flag to show, that he's belonging and to the American nation, and because he's part of the American team. And at some point, running around the stadium, there were also Mexican supporters with flags, and Manzano, without further thinking, took the Mexican flag, because Leo Manzano was born in Mexico, and he moved when he was 3 or 4 to the US. His parents were migrants moving from Mexico for, a better life in the US and having work and a decent life. And Manzano took this flag as a way to express his sort of double identity and double citizenship, double culture. And he started running around the stadium with those 2 flags and was probably very happy to express his sort of double identity and double citizenship. And this has generated tremendous controversy on social media, and that turned very nasty very quickly, very nasty on one side, but also very supportive on the other side of the spectrum. There were on social media reaction from all parts of the US, but also from other parts of the world, with people saying, well, if you're not happy to be American, you can get back to your country and eat your tacos. And you are not loyal to your country that hosted you, that trained you, and that made you a champion. And there were another side of the spectrum with people reacting on social media, but also op-eds. Even there were op-eds in the New York Times and major newspaper in the US, and say, what's wrong with that? I mean, this kid is just explaining that identity is not just one block, but that it's a composite and it's a mix of different elements, of different layers. And And I found this story quite telling and quite striking about the sort of the dilemma that many of us are confronted, and it's extremely interesting to see that this story of Leo Manzano has generated lots of very much polarized comments, and it shows how sensitive is this issue. The second slide that I would like to share with you is this sort of cartoon, and I invite you to read it by yourself. I don't think it's really required lots of explanation. And it shows that, it's very difficult to deconstruct the stereotype, and it's very important when, we want to address this issue of polarization and understanding about the other and the other culture, to try to put yourself in the shoes of the other. I think this exact similar comments on those two extreme opposite situations shows that, this is, again, a very complex issue, but also that we really need to put ourselves in the shoes of the other. I wanted to just to use those two visuals to, in a way, to start this this presentation, because I think that everyone, in a way, is reacting by a way or another to the Manzano story, and also I think this cartoon is offering an interesting perspective. But in a way, to say that today, all societies throughout the world, this is not just a US American phenomenon, this is not just a Western world phenomenon, but this is something that we see in most societies around the world at different levels. But this sort of fractured society is really something that we see increasingly developing in all parts of the world. And most societies today are plagued by polarization and are increasingly fractured, and people are clashing increasingly over values, over belief, over identity. And in a way, for those, who are from an older generation, we have been living until the fall of the Berlin Wall with a dividing line, which was ideology. And now the dividing line is not much or no longer about ideology, but very much about identity. And the issues at stake are giving place to extreme views. And we witness major divides between a whole range of issues. This is what, and we could maybe move to the next slide and look at what I call, the living together dilemma, and with two major dividing lines. One, what I call the vertical divide between what we could call the globalist or the anywhere, as David Goodhart, the British authors, calling those who speak languages, who are very agile at seizing opportunities to this open and global world. And at the bottom of this vertical divide, you have what we could call the localist or the somewhere. So it's the division or the divide between the anywhere and the somewhere, or also, like some are calling them, the patriots, which is a very perverse way, because you can be a globalist, but also very loyal and patriot in your country. But this is really, and I think that I don't need to elaborate much further. We understand very well, this divide between those who are having global perspective, global responsibility, feel that, we are not just from our respective neighborhood or country, but we are also part of a much broader community, which also leads to common responsibility or global responsibility. And then you have the horizontal divide, which is another a very sensitive issue between those who consider that religion has nothing to do with the public sphere. Religion has nothing to do with public policy. and that religion is a private thing, that everyone has the right to worship, has the right to practice their religion and whatever belief they have. But this is something that is private and that should not interfere in the public discourse and the public policy. And then at the other side of the spectrum, you have those who consider that we as individuals are nothing but the emanation or the expression of a spiritual movement that is by far dominating who we are, and that should influence and impact all public policy. And the interesting and also worrying thing is that those two dividing lines between the globalist and localist, secular and religious, is having some sort of centrifugal forces. They are going further and further and further in the opposite direction. And in a way, it is fair to recognize that those tribes or those people, wherever they are, in a way dismiss each other more and more. They hate each other, they ignore each other more and more. And for many reasons, and one of them, of course, is the role of social media. We hear more and more, because they are more and more allowed those extreme, and this is in a way very much polarizing the public debate and societies where we are. These are in a way the main divide, but of course, we know the divide between those who say that facts should be seen as the reality, and at the other side of the spectrum, the fake news, on one side the pro-life, on the other side the abortion, the vegan versus the carnivore, the LGBT versus the straight. We see every sort of sexual orientation, religious belief, nutritional orientation is becoming an issue for confrontation. And we feel as individuals that this is dominating the debate, and that we are living in a very violent environment. But the reality is, and of course this is subject to discussion, the reality of our society is in the middle, is that you have out there, what we could call the silent majority of the moderates, where, and then maybe you can say it is 80%, 70%, whatever, it depends from one country, from one state to the other. But the reality of our societies is that most people, in a way, are sort of oscillating between one and the other, the vertical or the horizontal, and are willing or aspiring to combine those different perspectives. It is not a black and white picture. It is not a one against the other, but a profound aspiration to try to combine and to say, yes, indeed, religion should not be in the center of public policy, but I also want, to see respect for religion. Or it's also people who say, yes, I want to travel, I want to have my children studying abroad, I want eventually to go and work abroad and to get inspired by other culture. But in the meantime, I also want, in a way, to have my roots, my culture, my tradition, being properly respected and sustained. So my point is to say that there is this silent majority of the moderates, which by definition, it doesn't speak up. And in a way, the debate in the media, the public media, the social media, the mainstream media is very much kidnapped by the extreme. And we tend to forget that there is a profound aspiration by most people around to, in a way, as I said, try to combine those different perspectives, to live in peace, to promote education for development, for respect, for etc., etc. And this is where in a way, the reality of our society is indeed, this domination by the silent majority of the moderate, and the need, therefore, to strengthen the voice of the moderate, and not to leave the public space or the public area or the media space only to the extreme and the radical. So the real challenge is to strengthen the voice of the silent majority of the moderate. And in that respect, the role of government, of course, is important. It's very important to provide some sort of a legislative framework to prevent hate speech, to encourage through normative way to live all together in the same society. But the reality is that you don't fight hate through legal norms. You fight hate by touching the mind and the heart of people. This is the only way you can combat hate speech. You can combat polarization. So the role of government is very important, but definitely not enough in a way to combat polarization and hate. And this is where, in a way, the connector comes into play. What I call the connector is a wide and diverse range of sectors of activities: business, industry, economic activities, but also sport, entertainment, which have a tremendous convening power and bring people together, regardless of their belief, regardless of their culture, regardless of their race, in order to share a common enthusiasm, a common attraction, a common aspiration. And those connectors, their core business and their core activity and they are striving in the business of connecting people and culture and massive audience. I want just to give you a few examples. If you take, and I know that you are in California, Jim, and I heard through an old friend of mine who was with the Aspen Institute that he has been recently appointed as the chair or the president of the Rose Bowl Stadium. What is the Rose Bowl Stadium Institute? And it's very interesting because the Rose Bowl leadership has realized that they are having supporters and people. I understand this is one of the largest stadiums in the world, and they are having supporters coming from different races, different sexual orientation, different culture, different, etc., etc. But they realize that when people come to the stadium, they all belong to one single community that is supporting the Rose Bowl team. And they are all sharing this moment of excitement, this moment of pleasure and leisure. And so they tend to forget their divisions and differences. But the minute they go back to their home, the old sort of stereotypes are getting back. And the Rose Bowl Stadium has decided to create this institute with the mandate to develop educational initiative, awareness raising, bringing people together and using their convening power, their unique convening power, and also their capacity, as I said before, to touch the mind and the heart of the people. And so this is not just about putting forward a legal norm. No, this is to say, after all, we are one community and we should act together as one community. So this is one example of a typical connector It's interesting to see that there are already a few other sports clubs, and I heard about here in my country, the PSG, which is the #1 soccer club, has developed a whole campaign using the stadium, using the communication tools and the capacity to reach a massive and extremely diverse audience, to raise awareness and to develop educational initiative to promote understanding among people. There are plenty of those examples. For instance, last year, it's interesting to see that during at the peak of the Black Lives Matters crisis, Netflix has created a special set of program with movies and stories about racist discrimination, in order to, in a way, to use the extraordinary capacity of the film industry to speak to the mind and the heart of people. If you take, I don't know if some of you have seen from this extraordinary movie, it's called Invictus, which was the story of the rugby in South Africa, and the way Nelson Mandela managed to bring the radical opposition in his country to communicate or to celebrate all together a sense of one nation and one community. You have plenty of those examples. I don't want to be too long, but recently I have seen in several countries in Europe, and I think it's probably the same in the United States, where Uber has developed a major campaign to fight all sorts of discrimination on gender, on races, etc., to the point also of creating some sort of a code of conduct for their own staff, but also for their customer, to embrace a sense of community and being all together. There are plenty of, I'm currently having talks, for instance, with an airline company. The tourism industry, well, not in the time of COVID, but the latest, the year before the COVID, there were, I think, 1.5 billion people who flew across borders. So 1.5 billion people, it's about 1/5 of humanity that is flying across borders. And I'm having talks with airlines companies to see how they could use their TV screens and the menu, instead of having only the traditional, let's say, blockbusters, and nothing against the blockbusters, but to say that why in their menu they would not also offer either short movies or sort of fun, educational short film about other culture, about other religion, and again, taking advantage of people being happy to travel, being happy to be in family, to go to discover another culture, to develop this sort of educational journey about other culture. It's very interesting to see also how the fashion industry is increasingly involved in the tremendous power they have on youth to develop initiative to fight all sorts of discrimination. And my point here is really to say that the tremendous task and the imperative task to try to bring our societies together, to avoid that they would fall apart, as we see now in many countries, it is absolutely indispensable to mobilize those connectors, who can speak, who can address and who can involve their community, because they have a tremendous convening power and also trust from many of their customers. So this is what the Connectors for Peace project is about. It is really to, fight polarization and discrimination by identifying innovative initiative as the one I just mentioned, and to create some sort of a peer-to-peer movement, to go from one stadium to the other and say, look at what the Rose Bowl Stadium is doing, or look at what the PSG is doing. Why don't you do the same? So it is nothing mind-blowing. It is nothing about reinventing the wheel. It is very much about saying, look, you have a role to play. You have a responsibility. And also to say, your core business actually is to connect the people. So if our societies are falling apart, your core business will be damaged or harmed by those divides in our societies. So you should better play your role, play the role you can play to, in a way, to educate and to develop those sort of initiative. So this is the point one, is looking at innovative initiatives that are already existing, and to see how we can help to scale up and replicate. So the principle is very simple: scale up and replicate. And then there will be a second track, which will be to develop concrete or tailored initiative for connectors who would be interested in developing their own project. Like, for instance, what the Rose Bowl Stadium has been doing, maybe other sectors of activity will be saying, I would like to do something indeed, because I feel concerned, I feel committed, and I want to play this role of peace agent in bringing together people in culture in my country, in my society, in my community, but I don't know what to do. So the role of the Connectors for Peace will be to work with them to invent and to design a campaign, educational program, communication programs, and I'm currently having a discussion with a web digital platform that is called BlaBlaCar. BlaBlaCar is about 80 million people in Europe who are, it's a car pooling or car sharing. So if you are, let's say, in Berlin, Germany, and if you want to go to Moscow in Russia, you can, this platform of BlaBlaCar is bringing or connecting people, those who have a car that is going to Moscow anyway, and those who want to go to Moscow and who take advantage of 2 or 3 seats that are free in the car. So this is really to connect the people, and really also to go to other destination, other culture. And I'm having discussion with BlaBlaCar, who is very interested because in a way, this is part of their DNA. It's interesting to see and or to hear their reaction, because they consider indeed that their role or their footprint is very much, or their business DNA is very much about connecting people and exploring different culture. So they were interested, and we are working with them to create a sort of a quiz, because we don't want to be academic. We're nothing against academic, but we want to be very concrete, very practical, very, in a way, grassroots level. And so we are developing a quiz so that when people join in the car, when they are having a 5-hour, 6-hour, 8 hours travel together, sometimes, they don't know exactly what to discuss, and they would use this quiz and there will be questions and response about the different culture, the different religion, the different, in a very fun and entertaining way. So this will be the second track of our activities, will be to tailor or to design specific activities and program for the connectors to be or to become. Interestingly, and as Jim has mentioned in his introduction, so the Connectors for Peace is still in its very early infancy. We are finalizing the website that will be launched in September, and we will also hopefully be able to make a major launching event in October. And it's very interesting to see that many partners have already expressed interest and willingness to support by a way or another this initiative. So I'm considering with my colleagues, my team, and the advisory board that we have created to put the initiative of the Connectors for Peace under the auspices of UNESCO, which is the UN agency on education and peace, and education for peace. And that would be, of course, the recognition of the pertinence of our work. And also because I know that Jim and the whole Ubiquity University is very concerned and very focused on the Sustainable Development Goals, we, of course, have put this initiative of the Connectors for Peace in support of the SDG 16, which calls to promote just, peaceful, and inclusive societies, which is absolutely key because I think it's very important, and that will be also part of the Connectors for Peace goals and objective. It's really to advocate and acknowledge that sustainability, of course, is about addressing climate change, which is of tremendous importance. Of course, it is also about addressing poverty and inequality. But it is also very, very important to address this issue of building cohesive society, and this is very much, and because the cohesion of our society is also very much about peace. It's interesting to know that there is a recent report by UNESCO that shows that about 75% of the conflicts in the world today are grounded based in cultural divide. If you look at the map or the photography of conflict in the world today, you have very, very few international conflicts, but most conflicts are based on cultural, ethnic, racial divides. And this is very much what this initiative is about. I hope I didn't speak for too long and that we have enough time for a conversation. Thanks for listening to this presentation, and I would be extremely interested in having a exchange and discussing those orientation with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Jean-Christophe. There was a few comments about the blah blah car. That's a very interesting name for a start. And is that just in Europe?
For now, I think it's only in Europe. But if you are interested, I can tell Frédéric Mazzella, who is the founder, that he has fans in the US.
Well, thank you so much. You know, just starting with your statistic on, you know, UNESCO and that, you know, extremely high percentage of the problems now confronting humanity are simply based on miscommunication and lack of capacity to reach alignment. I know, for example, in the United States, the country is more polarized now than at any time since the Civil War 150 years ago. And there is no end in sight. The polity is getting further and further divided rather than united in any fundamental way. So I would love to hear from you as to how you understand this phenomenon. If you take even Europe, after building the EU, for, good 60 years now, 75, if you think it from the beginning of the end of the Second World War. And yet we had Brexit and, all the turbulence in the eastern part of the EU and the squabbles and so forth and so on. You wrote a book, Europe a la carte, I think about 15, 20 years ago on the 20th anniversary of the fall of the Berlin Wall, another kind of iron curtain that was drawn through Germany in this case, after the Second World War, and then consolidated by the Soviet Union and their eastern sector. As a European, and as a global citizen who's worked for so many international organizations and major corporations, how do you understand what's happening globally as the world experiences more global problems and yet is more fractured than ever before? Just to kind of conceptually and historically, how do you understand this phenomenon?
I wish, I would be able to have a simple response. There are multiple reasons, actually, or the multiple phenomenon that that popped up and that, in a way, are now coming to their extreme, in a way. But you cannot disconnect this situation of fractured society from an economic and financial perspective, and you cannot disconnect it from a geopolitical perspective. So there are two, and which are, in a way, the let's say the tectonic changes that we have been witnessing in most parts of the world in the last 30 to 40 years, but evidently with some sort of unlimited globalization of the economics and trades and finance, with let's say the automation, with the how we could call that, the outsourcing, the automation, the globalization. People have been losing jobs, and they have been feeling disenfranchised, and with a sense of the winners and the losers. And of course, we know that, but I think, there's been an aggravating factor, that's why I said, you cannot ignore the geopolitical perspective, is that evidently, we have seen in the past 20 years or so that the super hegemon that the US and Europe, or let's say the Western world, was representing, this hegemony is getting down. If you look at what is supposed to be the G7, so the 7 largest economies in the world, if you make just a projection to 10 to 15 years, probably only 2 of the countries of the G7 will qualify to be still part of the G7 in 2024. And of course, this creates lots of anxiety. Instead of trying to reflect on how we can create a world that would be, let's say, better balanced, and a world that would be multipolar, because let's say the decrease of the economic superpower, or the strategic, or the military, or the geopolitical superpower of the US and Europe doesn't mean that we will collapse. We will still be major players. And so we should, in my views, try to, instead of creating fear and that anxiety with people, the feel that they will be totally overwhelmed by China, by other part of the world, just it would be to say, how can we create a world where there will be specific or different pillars and create what we call a multipolar world, and with also with rules of the games, which will be to a certain extent adapted. We are still living with the UN Charter, and I have huge respect for the UN Charter. I've been spending many years of my life working with the UN, but let's have in mind, or let's remember that the UN Charter was adopted by 47 countries, and today the UN is representing 193 countries, I believe. So, which means that most of the developing world was not part, because they were colonies of most of European countries, and so they had no voice or no seat at the table. And what was seen during a very long time, I remember, because at that time I was with the World Bank, so my lens or my reading was much more economics than geopolitics or cultural, but still it was very clear to me at the very beginning in 2000, 2001, when we started talking about what we call the BRICS, the Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. The BRICS was not just an economic gathering or economic, but becoming a major economic, trade and financial player. They also wanted to have a seat at the table when it comes to define, in a way, the world where we are. And I know it's a very, very difficult issue, because one can say that we should not open the Pandora box when it comes to human rights, when it comes to gender, when it comes to child labor, when it comes to a whole range of issues which are enshrined in the UN Charter. But there is a reality where we are living in a world where many people are, or sort of either disagree or have different perspective. And I think that the big mistake, probably our children and grandchildren will have a hard time to understand, that we have been so blind at the turn of the millennium to ignore that the world is in a profound change, and that there is a need for, and that's what I said in my introduction, for having a global conversation and to discuss the fundamental values. What is it that bring us together as one single humanity? And we are still, or that's what I feel now, and we see more and more attempts to say we want to keep on dominating the world with our values and with our superpower, and we don't want to create space, which is something that I respect, but is probably not the way to go, because we are in denial of a new reality of the world, just if you take the demographics, everybody knows, that we are a shrinking part of the world humanity. And we cannot expect, with a few 100 million people in the US and a few 100 million people in Europe, we cannot expect to decide and to set the tone and to set the standards and to set the values for we represent barely 1/5 or 1/6 of humanity. If you read, that's why, of course, you cannot disconnect from the geopolitical thing, but the reaction, and not just in China, but many countries in Asia, of the recent G7, in Cornwall, which was presented by the Western media as a tremendous success, and that a democracy and is back, and I'm all for that. I mean, I'm a child and I'm a kid of the Western world, and I profoundly believe in our values. When it comes to human rights, when it comes to pluralism, when it comes to freedom of expression, these are fundamental values that, in a way, are worth our life. But we will not impose those values for moral reason. We will be able to impose those values because we will be able to prove that they work better than other systems. And for now, we are not doing this exercise. And I mean, it's very important that's why I use this slide, with those two women, who look at each other. And it's very important, if you want to understand the reality of the world today, to put yourself in the shoes of the other. And the reaction of the G7 in many countries in Asia, but also to a certain extent in Africa, was to say, what is this circus, where you have about 1/8 of the world population that is saying, okay, we will decide again for everything. So that is something that, of course, because you have the populists, who are taking profit and advantage of the fear and anxiety of people, because we feel increasingly disenfranchised. And in a way, we have also, and that will be my last comment about your question, but I think it's important to also acknowledge that in a way, the past 40 to 50 years, the focus was very much on economic development, prosperity, wealth, making profit, making money, and in a way, turning down issues such as values, belief, and human in a way. And it's interesting because you ask about Europe, EU. I don't know if you have been following the recent development, but there is now a growing gap that is splitting, let's say, the old Western Europe and the newcomers of Central Europe, the Poland, Hungary, which is very much about fundamental cultural value, which is about democracy, the rule of law, freedom of speech, independence of justice, and lately, the whole LGBT issue. I don't know if you have heard about a few parts of Poland and Hungary which are declared now LGBT free. In other words, no LGBT community or advocacy in some cities and part of the country. So this is really becoming a major headache for the EU. And recently, there were a special meeting of the ministers at the EU level, and this is getting very, very bloody now, with some countries, saying if they don't want to embrace the fundamental values of pluralism, of the rule of law, freedom of speech, independence of justice, they should leave. So this would have been totally inconceivable just 10 to 15 or 20 years ago.
Yes. Well, and as you know, in the United States, the situation is in some ways more grim, as the demographics are moving dramatically now, so that the Caucasian race is now the minority race. Hispanics, Asians, people of color generally, young people are surging into majority in area after area. And the Republican Party, seeing this demographic tsunami, rather than embracing it and changing policies to serve that emerging demographic, are suppressing the voter laws, doing everything they can to keep people of color and young people from voting in elections. And that has been the single greatest priority of the Republican Party since the 2020 election that swept Trump out of office and the Democrats into the majority in the House and the Senate, and of course the White House. But again, rather than seeing the handwriting on the wall, the problem is getting worse and worse, and therefore the country's getting more and more divided. And I wanted to accentuate this because that means that Connectors for Peace, in many ways, is a top priority for humankind right now. It's not just Europe. Look at different countries in Asia, what's been going on in Myanmar, for example, even in China with the suppression of the Uyghurs, the suppression of Hong Kong, the rising totalitarianism of that country. In India, the campaigns by the central government against the indigenous people in South India, against the farmers. In Brazil with Bolsonaro, rising authoritarianism again, but increasing civil strife and indications that Brazil is in a more polarized situation now than it's ever been. So that the challenge that you're putting for yourself and for us today in Humanity Rising and through your organization could not be more, I would say, urgent, almost anywhere you want to look around the world. So in the first instance, I just want to applaud you, Jean-Christophe, for the courage in taking up this issue. And then to ask you that as you look ahead in the formation of Connectors for Peace, you laid out the different aspects of it, but is there going to be a central initiating project that you can tell us about that we can support in some way as you launch? Because I think almost everybody listening to Humanity Rising, certainly today on this broadcast, would want to get involved and to support you in some way.
Well, thanks a lot. I mean, I appreciate your willingness to help, and as I said, this is still in its infancy. We will launch the Connectors for Peace in next fall. Hopefully, the COVID will be away, and we are planning to have a major launching event at UNESCO headquarters here in Paris. And what I think would be, I mean, probably the best way to help, and there is no, I would say, major flagship project that can be supported for now. What I think is important is to spread the word and to identify or to advocate or to speak. I mean, whoever has access to one of the connectors who is not doing anything yet, and there is no blame and shame, not at all. But my point is to say, we need, as it was done maybe 40 years ago. You mentioned very kindly in your introduction that when I was with the United Nations, I initiated a world campaign with about 20 of the largest firms in the Silicon Valley, mostly IT firms, that was on diversity, to promote diversity. And in a way, we started from the very, very early beginning of the climate change. When 40 or 50 years ago, there were people talking about it, and where people say, well, what is it that I can do? So, I mean, it seemed to be so abstract. And then you remember there was those sort of very basic things to say, yes, there is something you can do. When you leave this room, you switch off the light. When you brush your teeth, you turn off the tap. And these were very small things, but this was the very beginning of involving people themselves. And it has been a long journey, but today, you know, this is everybody is involved. And what we are willing to do with this issue of fighting polarization and creating cohesion in our society is really, we are still at the time of planting seeds, and making everyone aware that a society that is fractured is a society that is losing, because it is not tapping its full potential, when actually, when you have the capacity, when people feel that they are part of a community, they give the best of themselves and they work all together in the same direction. So there is a phase one, which is really sort of advocacy and to put the issue on the international agenda. And to sort, I mean, I was somewhat frustrated at some point when I was with the UN, and when there was a whole process of identifying the SDGs. And I think, well, we have this SDG 16, which is about building inclusive societies. But I think there should be much more focus, because this is, for some countries and society, a matter of almost life and death. So what is really important is that there is more and more awareness. And in that respect, I mean, for me to have the opportunity to address today Humanity Rising is very important. Hopefully, you know, it will trigger further conversation. And so this is what is, in a way, the prerequisite to the success of this initiative. And this is also why I have decided to, you know, to put the Connectors for Peace under the auspices of UNESCO, in order to have a global scope. So this is what we need. But definitely, if there is something more concrete, I will get back to you, and hopefully we can work together with your community on developing concrete initiative.
Well, thank you so much. And just know that we stand ready to support you in any way. And I think for two fundamental reasons. Number one, as we've agreed and is obvious to almost anybody paying attention, this issue is critical. We can't solve any of the issues out there without a harmonized social cohesion that enables the kind of mobilization that's required.
Mm.
And secondly, that's what Humanity Rising is here for. In fact, our URL is humanityrising.solutions. So whenever we find somebody like you that is really giving of yourself heartfully and courageously to taking on some of these intractable problems, we want you to know that we stand with you every step of the way. And so we look forward, for example, to having you back maybe in the fall sometime, where you can give us an update. You're just you're invited to interact with us because that's why we're here. So thank you, Jean-Christophe, so much for taking the time today. Connectors for Peace, everyone. Creating the synergies we all know are needed, but working as Jean-Christophe has done for decades now at very high levels of government, of diplomacy, of the corporate and NGO sectors to bring major players and celebrities together around supporting the honoring of human diversity in a creative and cohesive way. So we thank you, Jean-Christophe, for joining us today. And then tomorrow, everyone, we will be discussing the future of economics with one of the great economists of our time, Hazel Henderson, who's been writing on economics for many, many years. And like Jean-Christophe, has really been on the front lines of social change in that particular domain. And that's tomorrow on Humanity Rising. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you tomorrow, same time, same station. Bye for now.
Thank you.
Christophe.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you so much.
If I can ask you a favor, if I could have a copy of all the comments, because there were lots of very interesting comments, but I cannot keep track of them, and also lots of links, and that would be a way to stay connected.
Sure. We'll send it to you.
Definitely. Okay, fantastic. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Jim. Bye-bye.